Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Please do not forget to click like and subscribe if you want more updates on true crime stories. Thank you. November 13th, 2022, a Sunday morning like any other, until it wasn't. In a small, quiet college town called Moscow, Idaho. 4 lives were about to be stolen in the most brutal way imaginable. No warning, no signs, but just silence, and then horror. Inside a modest 3-story house at 1122 King Road. 6 roommates lived together. They were best friends and also students at the University of Idaho. That night, only 5 were home, and by morning, only 2 would remain. The house was alive the night before: laughter, parties, TikToks, and just normal college energy. Xana, Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin spent the evening at a fraternity party. Kaylee, Goncalves, and Madison Mogen were downtown, smiling, dancing, and eating at a food truck. Everything was normal, until it wasn't. Around 3 a.m., surveillance cameras stopped recording the girls as they returned home tired and unaware of the shadow already watching them. The back sliding door wasn't locked, maybe it never was. After all, this was Moscow and nothing bad ever happened here. But this time, evil came in quietly. The killer didn't need to force his way in, but he slipped inside like a ghost. Careful and calculated. He moved upstairs to Kaylee and Maddie's room. They were sleeping in the same bed. Lifelong friends and soul sisters. No one heard a scream or heard the blade. In the next room were Xana and Ethan. Xana was awake, we know this from her phone activity. She'd been scrolling on TikTok minutes before. She might have heard something. She might have seen him, but we may never know. However, we know this: that she fought. Xana fought back with everything she had. Her autopsy showed bruises, cuts, and resistance. Ethan was close, but he never had a chance. And then, silence again. The killer exited the same way he entered. No shattered glass. No footprints. Just 4 bodies, in a knife sheath. The sun rose over King Road. The town remained unaware until just before noon. A roommate called 911 and said someone had passed out. Said they needed help. What the responding officers walked into was worse than anything they'd imagined. There was blood everywhere. On the walls and the sheets, seeping into the floors. The students had been stabbed to death in their sleep. Most never had time to scream. It was over in minutes and the killer, gone. Police were baffled. There was no forced entry. No clear motive. Weeks passed and students left town, but fear gripped the university. Was it someone they knew? A stalker? A serial killer? Then came the first break: the knife sheath that was left behind at the scene, a U.S. Marine Corps K-bar sheath, and on the button snap, a single male DNA profile. It didn't match anyone in the system, but the investigators weren't done. They pulled security footage from neighbors. They started noticing a white Hyundai Elantra. It passed by the house 4 times that night and then disappeared. Across the state line, in Pullman, Washington, 28-year-old Bryan Kohberger lived alone. He was a PhD student in criminology, studying the psychology of killers. He drove a white Elantra and had no alibi. His phone had been turned off during the hours of the murder and back on just after. Police got a search warrant for his phone records, then his internet searches, and finally his family's DNA. It was a match. The DNA from the sheath matched Kohberger's father. Through genetic genealogy, the killer had been identified. But police waited. They watched him. Followed him. Tracked him as he drove cross-country for the holidays. Then, on December 30th, SWAT stormed his parents' home in Pennsylvania and Bryan Kohberger was arrested. Charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. The town of Moscow exhaled for the first time in weeks. But as the case unfolds, so do the questions. Why those victims? How did he choose them? Why did he leave a sheath, his only mistake? And what about the surviving roommates? What did they see? What did they hear? We may never know all of it, but we do know this. The night of November 13th will never be forgotten because inside that house on King Road, a monster walked free and 4 innocent lives were taken without mercy. This was just the beginning. The murders were over. But the story was just beginning. In the days that followed, grief swallowed the town of Moscow. But beneath the mourning, something darker was brewing. Who had done this? And how had he vanished without a trace? The town demanded answers. And the police? They had one clue. A single mistake. A knife sheath. Military grade. Left at the scene. It was the only thing he left behind. But it would be enough to unravel him. Because on the snap of that sheath was DNA. Just a trace. But it was the killer's. And now, they were going to find him. But first, they had to find the shadow. Surveillance footage near the home revealed a car. A white Hyundai Elantra. Seen driving by, over and over. Once at 3:29 a.m. Again at 3:45. Then again. And again. Circling. Watching. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was hunting. By now, the killer was gone. But investigators had a trail. A digital trail. Security cameras. Cell tower pings. Car registration databases. One by one. They closed in. Until they landed on a name. Bryan Kohberger. 28 years old. Graduate student. Criminology major. He didn't live in Idaho. He lived just across the border, in Pullman, Washington. Just 10 miles away. He drove a white Elantra. And his phone? Turned off, during the murders. Then suddenly, back on, minutes after the estimated time of death. It was too perfect. Too planned. But even the most calculated killers leave something behind. Bryan Kohberger wasn't just a student, he was obsessed. He had posted on Reddit under the name Inside Looking, years before the murders, asking disturbing questions. How does it feel when you commit a crime? Does the killer feel remorse? It wasn't curiosity but craving. He wasn't studying killers. He was becoming one. But why those victims? Why that house? That's where it gets darker. He had followed Kaylee. Multiple Instagram DMs, all unanswered. He watched their TikToks and zoomed in on details. He wasn't just choosing targets, but he was studying them. Their habits. Their routines. When they got home. When they fell asleep. It was methodical, predatory, and terrifying. Police mapped out his phone pings and found something that made their blood run cold. Kohberger's phone had been near the victim's house. At least 12 times before the murders. 12. This wasn't random. He had been stalking them for weeks. And the night of the murders? His phone shut off from 2:47 a.m. to 4:48 a.m. Right in the window of the killings. He thought that would erase his trail, but it only sharpened the timeline. After the murders, Kohberger returned to Washington. Business as usual. Grades. Classes. Life, as if nothing had happened. But behind the scenes, the walls were closing in. FBI agents followed him across the country. He drove with his father, all the way to Pennsylvania. They watched him throw trash into neighbors' bins. They collected DNA, and when it matched the knife sheath, it was over. SWAT arrested Bryan Kohberger in the early morning hours of December 30th. He was barefoot, wearing latex gloves and cleaning his car. When they searched his apartment, more gloves. Dark clothing. Hair from an unknown source in a vacuum. It wasn't just preparation. It was ritual. The FBI had built a digital cage and he had no way out. But one question still hangs in the air. Why? What drives someone to plan something so cold? So brutal? Was it rejection? Control? Or fame? We may never truly understand because Bryan Kohberger isn't talking. He maintains his innocence. He claims the evidence is circumstantial and his lawyers say the case is flawed, but the evidence says otherwise. The arrest shocked the world, but it was only the surface. To truly understand what happened on November 13th, we have to go deeper. Not into the crime but into the mind of the man accused of committing it. Who is Bryan Kohberger? What shaped him? What broke him? And how does someone who studies killers become one? Bryan Kohberger was born in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. A quiet, woodsy place far from any headlines. He was the middle child raised by 2 school employees. On paper, a normal suburban life, but those close to him say he was never really normal. Classmates described him as socially awkward, intelligent, but detached. He rarely made eye contact and rarely spoke, but he watched. Always watching. In high school, his behavior shifted as he became obsessed with diet, body image and he lost over 100 pounds in a single year. Friends said the transformation changed more than his appearance. It changed his personality. He became cold, paranoid and aggressive. There were rumors of heroin use, self-loathing, violent ideation and isolation. In 2014, Bryan posted on a forum for people with visual snow, a rare neurological condition. His words are haunting. I feel like I have no self-worth. I am nothing and I have no opinion. I can do whatever I want with little remorse. He talked about being numb. About separating from reality and losing control. Years before the murders, the mind was already unraveling, but on the outside. He looked like progress. A bachelor's in psychology, then a master's in criminal justice and a PhD track in criminology at Washington State University. He studied crime scene patterns. He debated motive versus opportunity. He presented papers on serial killers. He even helped grade undergraduate assignments on homicide theory. All while allegedly planning a quadruple murder. But here's where it gets darker. In the months before the killings, Bryan conducted a survey. It was posted in Reddit forums for ex-cons and criminal minds. The questions were chilling. Why did you choose your target? How did you prepare? How did you leave the scene undetected? Was it for research? Or was it practice? Then came the DMs. Multiple messages to one of the victims. Ignored. Repeated. Obsessive. He followed their social media and racked their locations. Cell data shows he visited the area around King Road at least a dozen times. One night, he was caught on camera sitting in his car alone and staring at the house hours before anyone died. The psychological profile starts to take shape. Isolation. Obsession. A desperate need for control. And underneath it all, rage. Not the loud, angry kind but the quiet, calculated kind. The kind that builds in silence, that studies victims. That waits for the right moment. That smiles when no one is watching. Bryan Kohberger was fascinated by serial killers, but not just how they kill but how they think. He wanted to know what it felt like. What it meant to have power over life and death. And in his eyes, the students at 1122 King Road weren't people, they were subjects, data points. To be observed and then eliminated. When police searched his home, they found black gloves, a face mask, dark clothes, and a vacuum filled with hair. The walls were closing in, but inside his mind, there was still detachment. At his first court appearance, no emotion. No fear, but just silence. So what drives someone like this? A failed need for connection? A craving for power? Experts say it's likely a mix of narcissism and psychopathy. He wanted to prove something. Not just to the world, but to himself, that he was smarter, better, and invisible. But the mistake he made, the sheath, shattered that fantasy. Now he faces trial and the world waits. Inside that courtroom, every gesture is analyzed. Every twitch. Every blink. Does he feel guilt? Or only fear of being caught? Some say he looks empty. Others say he looks proud. Maybe the most terrifying truth is, he doesn't feel anything at all. What does justice look like for a man like Bryan Kohberger? Can a trial explain the why? Or is the mind too far gone? One psychiatrist said, he's not insane. He's intentional. Intentional in stalking, in planning, in executing. And now, in staying silent. There's one more twist, a note allegedly found in his apartment. Some say it's a journal, however, others say it's a list, but authorities haven't released it. Not yet. The deeper we go, the colder it gets. The arrest was only the beginning. Now, it's time for the truth to face the courtroom. Bryan Kohberger, 28 years old. PhD student. Criminology scholar. Accused of slaughtering 4 students in their sleep. But now he's no longer the one studying crime, he's the one on trial. And the courtroom is about to become a battlefield. It began on January 3, 2023. A small-town courthouse surrounded by national media, tight security, and high tension. Bryan Kohberger entered the courtroom in shackles, but what caught everyone's attention was his face. Emotionless. Blank. Like nothing had happened. He didn't look at the victims' families, neither did he flinch at the charges. Just silence. He stood accused of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. His plea? Not guilty. Not a whisper of remorse. Not a flicker of hesitation. And that's when the real game began. The defense team knew the odds were stacked. DNA on the knife sheath. Phone pings at the crime scene. Surveillance of his car circling the house. But they had a strategy. Create doubt. Discredit the investigation, attack the process, and most of all, keep Bryan quiet. The judge ordered a preliminary hearing. That's when the prosecution brought out its arsenal. They laid out a chilling timeline. 2:47 a.m., Kohberger's phone turns off. 3:29 a.m., his car seen near King Road. 4:20 a.m., his car flees the scene. 4:48 a.m., phone turns back on. Right in the murder window. Coincidence? Or calculation? The jury would decide. Then came the witnesses. The surviving roommate. Her voice shook. But her story didn't. She had seen a figure, tall, masked, black clothing, and walking calmly out of the house. Not running. Not rushing. Just walking. Like he'd done what he came to do. More evidence poured in. A shoe print outside the sliding door, a strand of hair on a glove in Kohberger's trash, and the vacuum bag full of fibers and unknown hair. Everything added weight and pressure. The defense pushed back. Contaminated evidence. Biased investigation. Too circumstantial. But the jury listened in the courtroom, stayed silent. Then came the moment everyone had waited for. The prosecution introduced the possibility of the death penalty. If convicted, Bryan Kohberger could face lethal injection. His expression didn't change, but his lawyers went into overdrive. They filed motions to suppress evidence, to delay proceedings, and question search warrants. Every move, designed to slow things down and shake the foundation. But the most haunting moment came from Kaylee, Goncalves' father. He looked directly at Kohberger. And said, "You looked my daughter in the eyes, and you did nothing to save her." The room froze. Even Kohberger looked up, for just a moment. No words. Just a flicker. Then nothing. Outside the courtroom, the country was watching, true crime forums exploded, and debates raged. Was this a slam-dunk case? Or was something being missed? Kohberger's silence made it worse. He never spoke, never testified, and maybe that was the scariest part, because monsters don't always growl, sometimes they just stare. The defense tried one final twist. They suggested the DNA could have been planted, that someone else could have taken the car. They hinted at an alternate theory. Was Bryan Kohberger being framed? But the facts kept stacking up. DM attempts to the victims. Repeated phone pings near the house. The Reddit questionnaire for criminals. The knife sheath with his DNA. It all pointed in one direction and the jury felt it. After weeks of evidence, the prosecution rested. The room waited. Would Kohberger take the stand? Would he defend himself? No. He declined. His silence was the final act. Now, we wait. The jury deliberates, the families hold their breath and the world wonders. Will justice be served? Or will the man who slipped through the night, will also slip through the cracks of the system? And it's time to confront what happens, after the trial ends. It was the moment everyone had waited for. After months of hearings, motions, witness testimony, the jury returned to the courtroom. 12 people. Each holding the weight of 4 lost lives. The judge asked for the verdict. Guilty. On all counts. Bryan Kohberger showed no reaction, no remorse or fear. Just the same blank expression that had followed him since day one. The families embraced. Some cried. Some sat frozen. This wasn't closure but was confirmation. They had lost their children to a calculated, cold-blooded killer and now, he would spend the rest of his life behind bars or face death. Because the prosecution had pursued the death penalty and with the guilty verdict in place, the sentence phase began. Now the focus shifted not on facts but on pain. Victim impact statements poured in. Each more devastating than the last. Kaylee's mom stood trembling at the podium. She was more than a daughter. She was my best friend. I don't know how to live without her. Ethan's brother's voice cracked. I still wait for him to text me. To tell me he's coming home but he never will. Maddie's father couldn't finish his statement. He collapsed into tears halfway through. Xana's family sat in silence. Their grief, too heavy to speak. For every minute of silence Kohberger gave the court, the families gave a lifetime of anguish. And the jury listened. They watched. They felt the weight. This wasn't just about punishment anymore, it was about meaning. Could there ever be justice for something this brutal? Psychologists were brought in to assess Kohberger. They were asked a simple question. Is he insane? The answer, no. He was intelligent. Aware. Capable of distinguishing right from wrong. He had planned. He had prepared. He had executed. Not madness. Intent. As the death penalty hung in the air, the defense begged for mercy. They pointed to his childhood. His alleged struggles with mental health. His academic accomplishments. But it didn't matter. Because for the families, the only thing that mattered was the lives he took. The jury deliberated again. The sentence? Death. Bryan Kohberger was sentenced to die by lethal injection. Still, no tears. No emotion. No apology. He simply nodded as if accepting a fate he had always known was coming. But even after the gavel fell, the questions didn't stop. What drove him to kill? Why those 4? Why that night? Did he ever feel remorse? Was there ever a chance to stop him? We may never know because Bryan Kohberger has never spoken. Not to the court. Not to the media. Not even to the families. Silence, once again, becomes his weapon. The Goncalves family launched a foundation in Kaylee's name, focused on supporting victims of violent crime. They speak at universities, warning young women about stalking. The Chapin family created scholarships. The Kernodles donated to youth programs. Maddie's friends launched a podcast about justice. They all move forward. But they never move on because grief doesn't end with a verdict but lingers like a shadow. The house at 1122, King Road? Gone. Demolished. Torn down by the university. They said it was for the students so they wouldn't have to walk past the horror every day. But for the families, it erased the crime scene. A place where the truth still lived in blood and walls. Some protested the demolition. Others welcomed it. Even in death, the debate rages on. Media outlets continue to analyze every angle. YouTubers, Redditors, podcasters. Everyone's searching for answers. How did a criminology student fool so many? Why didn't anyone see the warning signs? Some blame society. Some blame the system. Some just want to move on. But for those left behind? Moving on isn't an option. In interviews after the trial, Kaylee's sister said, "I still dream of her. I see her smiling. Then I wake up, and she's gone." That's the reality the headlines miss. The birthdays missed. The college graduations that never happened. The future, stolen. Bryan Kohberger now sits on death row, isolated and surveilled 24/7. His case may drag on for years with appeals, but he will never walk free. He will never step into another classroom. He will never study another killer because now, he has become the case study. An academic turned murderer. A man who thought he could outsmart justice had failed. The story of the Idaho College murders is one of unimaginable tragedy and also, one of resilience. For young lives were taken, but their memory has become a movement. A call for awareness. A demand for safety. A promise to never forget. Through the echo of their loss comes a vow to protect the next generation. To speak up. To never be silent, because in silence, evil thrives, but in truth, justice endures. Thank you for following this journey. From the night of the murders, to the arrest, the trial, and the verdict. This is dedicated to Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, Ethan, and to every family shattered by senseless violence. Subscribe to stay informed and never stop asking questions, because stories like this don't end. They echo. Why do you think Kohberger never spoke? Was it guilt, arrogance, or a twisted sense of control? Should the crime scene have been preserved for the sake of truth and future understanding, or demolished for healing? If you could ask Bryan Kohberger just one question, what would it be? Drop your thoughts below in the comments section and let's talk about it. Please like and subscribe to the channel for more true crime stories.